Hey, truth seekers and deep divers. There's a lot of questions that are asked in the scripture, like, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Or, what's another one? Well, the book of Job, chapter 14, verse 4, Job asked the question in his grief and in his agony, he says, can who can bring forth a clean thing from an unclean thing? Not one. He answers it himself and he says, no one can do that. But is that the final answer? Is that the final authority? No, I don't believe so at all. And I think hopefully we'll have time to show you that today. One of the things that very few people understand, I believe, is we are in a realm of dualities and polarities. People kind of get that concept, but when it comes to truth, I don't know really anyone hardly that understands that at all. No, hardly anyone comes to mind at the moment. That people think of truth is either you have the absolute truth or you have no truth. And we did a video some years ago called something about, is your truth really the truth? And we know that there's been a perversion and a twisting and a distortion in our day and age by the left, in which a lot of people think that just because they believe something, just because they want to identify as something, that it makes it true, and it doesn't. However, that doesn't negate the legitimacy of subjectivity or relative truth, in that everything has poles in this dimension, in this universe. Everything has two poles, two opposite forces sort of working. And so, including truth. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to jump in case we were about to lose people when you said relative truth or whatever. Like an example of this might be the two of us sitting in the room. The temperature is whatever it is. But, so that's the objective truth. He may be overheated, or I may be overheated. He may be cold. I may see it as hot. He may see it as cold. Either way, it doesn't change the temperature, but our subjective reality is true for us. If I happen to be going through menopause and having a hot flash, then, and I'm sweating, then to me, my subjective truth is that I am hot, and he may be over there huddled under a little blanket because I've got the air conditioner blasting. So that's an illustration of something that's objectively true, what the temperature is actually set on, what the AC is actually set on, and two of us having two very different experiences within that objective truth.
Right. Well, and when we're talking about absolute or objective truth, I don't think most people have thought through this. Basically, I'm going to define it this way, is the way God sees something. Maybe a way that we could define absolute truth. That's not how we see. We don't. We see from a very limited perspective. Like, a lot of times I use these art illustrations because I'm a painter, and if I'm setting up, even if I am able to paint something more accurately and true to life than anyone else, which I'm not, but if I could, that is still a limited truth from one perspective. It doesn't tell the story. I've seen a picture a while back, and it shows an apple standing in front of a mirror or something, and in the back of the apple that's not visible, it's rotten. And so, like, usually we're just able, well, if we're going to draw or paint a picture, we're only able to see it from one vantage point, from one perspective. And so that is our truth that we're trying to convey there. Picasso and others with Cubism tried to kind of show objects from multiple perspectives at the same time. And I guess it's an interesting concept and idea to pursue. I didn't really appreciate it myself.
Big surprise.
But so I think a lot of times this is something that if we think or we ask the question, because I think that's a lot of times the best way to do it, of Job asked this question and he answers it. And he says, Can who can bring forth a clean thing from an unclean? And he says, Not one.
God can.
But yeah, so is his statement true? Is everything in the Bible true? This is really another topic,
and it's a big one.
But I think it might need to be interjected just for food for thought there, that no, not every opinion shared within the pages of Scripture is the absolute truth, or we would have to say everything that Satan says is absolutely truth, which it says he's a liar.
And I mean, Solomon, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. If that's the case, then God just created this whole thing for vanity, and Yeshua coming and dying was a big vanity. So you kind of have to take all that in context.
Right. We have to realize it is a truth from a limited perspective, and it does not define the totality of all truth in all realms, in all dimensions, for all time.
Right.
And so, otherwise, if Solomon is right in totality, that vanity of vanity, all is vanity, then what we're doing right now, or what you're doing, or anything that we might do, and like you said, the work of Yeshua, or all of every prophet that was sent, every word of truth, every kind and generous act that was ever done was a complete vanity if we take it and we do not consider the other polar opposite perspective.
Right. Absolutely.
So Job asked that question, and he hastily, I think, answered it with no, not one. But we have here's another question that was asked in the new pages of the New Testament. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Basically, it's asking a very similar thing. Can a clean thing come out of an unclean? Because it was like kind of a slum.
But isn't that the gospel? Isn't that the essence of the gospel, that we are unclean, and he brings forth sons of God? He gives them power to become sons of God?
Well, it really is, and I think we'll see that as we proceed here. When we look at the book of Judges, chapter 14, verse 14, interesting, the Job passage is also in chapter 14. But if we look at the book of Judges, we've got a guy named Samson that you've heard about before, that was supernaturally strong, and he had killed a lion, and then he went back later, and this dead lion carcass, now he notices apparently bees buzzing around, and he looks, and the bees have built a hive inside of the carcass of that dead lion. And he finds it interesting enough to create a riddle about this subject
that nobody could get.
No, but his girlfriend told on him. He had a bet with some people, and the girlfriend revealed the answer to the riddle.
Is she his girlfriend? I don't know that she's his girlfriend.
I'm not sure if I have it here, but it says, out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. So when we analyze this, I don't think you have to be an expert in kosher to realize that a lion carcass is unclean. A lion is unclean to eat anyway, right. But a lion carcass is really gross and unclean. How about a bee? Is a bee clean or unclean? A bee is unclean.
Depending on what he's clean to do his job and make honey, but he's not clean to eat.
Yeah, it's not clean to eat. And so although a bee is unclean to eat, they make something that is clean. Honey is clean. And so Samson came up, and he discovered that the bees had built a hive within that carcass, and he reached in and pulled out honey, and then he went back and gave some of it to his mother and father, but he didn't tell them where he got it. So he literally brought forth a clean thing from an unclean. And when these kinds of things happen, it's not just giving us a history lesson.
Right.
On deeper levels, it's showing us, it's conveying truths. And it's also, I believe, everything is showing us on some level something prophetic.
I agree with that.
You have anything you want to add on that?
Well, it's just interesting to me, like on the bees and the animal carcass, obviously what didn't need to mix didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Even though the hive was inside the body of the lion, the dead lion, they didn't mix.
Mm-hmm.
Just like Yeshua being in the grave.
Yeah, I was going to get to that a
I'm
little
sorry,
bit later.
I always
That's all
jump
right.
ahead on
That's
your.
okay.
I don't look at his notes.
Yeah,
a
we
lot of
haven't really
times.
talked about how we're going to do this. I just told her really the topic.
So hurry, get on.
Yeah. Well, my friend Justin the other day, he asked me a question or something, or what have I been studying or thinking about, or what am I going to do a video on? I said, well, I'm thinking about this concept of, can a clean thing be brought forth from an unclean? And he made a comment, and I said, hey, I didn't even think of that.
Cool.
Whatever he said, but
That's cool.
it immediately caused me to, he gave me sort of somewhere to look, and it was Genesis chapter 1, because in Genesis chapter 1, particularly in verse 2, we see, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And so this is the condition of things in early Genesis. In Hebrew, it's tohu vavohu. It's like a chaotic desolation. Something with, on one hand, the potential for information without information, and then on the other hand, information that doesn't have structure put to it yet. And from that, it says, and the Ruach, the Spirit of God, hovered or vibrated upon the face of the deep. And then God said, Yehi or, let be light. Vayehi or, and there was light. And so the Apostle Paul in the New Testament regarding this sort of paraphrases it in 2 Corinthians 4:6. And he says, God commanded the light to shine out of the darkness. So just like Samson reaching into the lion's carcass and pulling out the sweet honey that's clean and good, God reaches into the darkness and pulls out light.
And not all darkness is evil.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a distinction there.
Yeah.
And as you're talking, I'm also thinking about childbirth.
Well, that's in there too.
It's in his
I've
notes
got
too.
I've got a lot of this
That's funny.
in here. Yeah. Well, let's look. I kind of want to go a little bit in chronological order. Noah, in Genesis 6, it begins to go into the story of Noah, and the earth was corrupt in that day, unclean. But from that, he pulls forth a clean person, a righteous person, and then after the judgment starts over with that. And then we go 10 generations further, and we have a very similar thing where we have a very unclean place, Babel or Babylon, which was a land filled with idolatry. And there was a guy named Terah that was an idol maker, worshipped other gods, but he had a son named Avram, destined to become Abraham, and God took that clean thing out of an unclean thing,
or made him clean.
Yeah, and brought forth a nation out of him. And so we're seeing that, on one hand, what Job said was correct. Who can bring forth a clean thing from an unclean thing? Not one. It's true from a limited perspective, and as a general rule, but it certainly isn't the last word on things.
Well, no, and I mean that's what God does continually, because especially if this realm is fallen, then anything that comes out of this realm that's good is going to disprove that point. And I mean, even Job himself, later on, he was restored from his unclean state. Whatever you think was going on there, I'm not trying to make a judgment about Job or anything, but just he had running sores. He'd lost his kids. I mean, he just kept having and he was just kept having these catastrophes and stuff. And so for someone who followed God, it was a very negative state that God reversed the fortunes of Job and brought a good thing, made a good thing happen out of, badness, which there's another scripture in the New Testament. I can't, I'm not, who turns all things for the good. And I'm not saying
Romans 8:28.
yeah, I mean, he'll work
All
things
things
for the good
yeah.
of them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. But so in that sense, as you continue to walk with God and let him do his alchemy on you, then he will turn things that might have been meant for evil and make them good, just like Joseph. That whole situation of him being thrown in the well and then sold into slavery was a bad situation, but salvation for his people came out of it.
Right, and tradition tells us that the well that he was cast into was filled with snakes and scorpions, and then he was drawn out of that well.
That's interesting.
Likewise, later on, he's cast into the dungeon, and then he's drawn out of the dungeon and ends up. So, clean things continue to be drawn out from the unclean. I'm reminded of Jordan Peterson often quoting or paraphrasing, I guess, something that is attributed to C.G. Jung, the psychoanalyst, that apparently derived the quote from medieval alchemist, that I'll try to paraphrase. Essentially, you'll find the answer in the filth, in the unclean, in the disturbing, in the dark, in the pain, in the troublesome, is where basically you're going to find the treasure.
Well, and that's the thing. If alchemy, if salvation, if a process of getting you to a better place is being worked, if the person is turned toward God or they're responding to God, and he can be at work in any situation. You can't just go do whatever you're going to do and be in total rebellion and have something clean come out of unclean.
Right.
But even though he can still do some miraculous things there, a lot of people have great testimonies, but we're speaking mainly of people who are intending, through the hardship and through the just absolute devastating crap that life just does to people, that clean and good and lovely things can come out of that.
Yeah, and you brought up alchemy. Maybe sometime we can get into that a little bit more, because just recently, actually, scientists at CERN were able to turn lead into gold, which was the dream of the alchemist, of turning base metals or something that we would think of comparatively as an unclean thing.
Or lesser.
Yeah,
Less
base
pure.
and rudimentary and sort of on the unclean side of the spectrum, to gold, which is the essence or symbol of purity.
Well, and you've kind of got something also paralleling what we're talking about that God does. There is a thing that man does where he tries to, without God or without working with the forces that God put here for us to work with, he'll try to duplicate, kind of like Egypt was able to duplicate the judgments that Moses was bringing, that God told Moses to bring on Egypt. You have people trying to fix problems by bioengineering and doing different things with medicine. And I'm not against all of those things. I just think there's a danger when you try to separate, being separated from God's precepts, his ordinances, his ways. And I don't mean necessarily even being religious. You can be someone who doesn't really know God that still has respect to the creation and the laws of creation without trying to go against all the laws of creation, like crossing crazy things with crazy things. Some of the stuff they're doing, they're trying to bring forth solutions out of our problems using tech and science and all that. And I understand the mindset of it, but there is a danger there, because often they leave out the light and truth and beauty, the things that God works into things or brings out of things that he's able to, and anyone walking with him is able to, often is left out of the equation when just humanity's trying to solve problems without giving due respect to the way he set things up.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, after all, God is the one who invented science, and so basically magic is something that it's, in a way, science that's not comprehended.
Yeah, I agree.
If we take a lighter to some, Brazilian jungle or something, I mean, it's magic because they don't understand the mechanics of it.
Yeah, I mean, the miraculous and magic, there's not a whole lot of difference. It's just, it's, first of all, it's a word. Magic is a word.
Right.
A miracle is a word. But are you working something or allowing God to work something using all of his pathways with his, sanctioned, the forces
built on
that are
laws.
sanctioned? It is. It
Yeah.
is. It's not just, people have this idea, when you just point and say something and it just appears, that's, and even that is another video, like that just has to be demonic or satanic. I mean, we've got documented cases of yogis producing food from seeming nothing, which, by the way, echoes what Yeshua did. I mean, he started with something.
Yeah, we got a book filled with
Yeah,
miracles of people doing things like that.
Exactly, things that don't make sense. And so, we're going to have to start looking under the hood at some of these things and asking questions around how is this happening when God's involved.
Yeah, there's a physics involved in it.
There is.
Let's see. We mentioned Abraham, Tamar, and Judah. That was a very unorthodox, sort of unclean, shameful kind of shameful situation there. But it ended up, God brought through that the Messianic King David ultimately in the Messianic line, just like Ruth the Moabitess. They were forbidden to be to become integrated into the children of Israel. In the book of Deuteronomy, where is it? Deuteronomy chapter 23, it says that an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever, even unto the 10th generation. It's another topic sometime we'll have to get into, how long is forever.
And maybe her being a woman helped.
Well, it was 10 generations, so it was the time.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, and so, not to get you off topic, but entering into the congregation, would that mean, like, as far as a son of Israel being circumcised and entering into the congregation, where under the law a woman might be a bit different entering into something through marriage?
Possibly. I do think it was, I believe she was the 10th generation, though, so
it is interesting.
it works out.
It does.
But, again, this lady was a foreigner, and not just a foreigner, someone who was blacklisted from being part of a people that were blacklisted from being part of the nation and of the congregation and having access. And through her, we have King David and ultimately the Messiah through this Gentile lady. We've got Rahab the harlot that we see in the book of Joshua, and Canaanite prostitute apparently, and again she's part of the Messiah's lineage.
She was made clean, right?
The red heifer. I want to mention it right quick. This week's Torah portion is about the red heifer in the book of Numbers, chapter 19, the Parah Adamah, the red heifer. And so all that thing had to be completely red. We talked about it before, and there's been some appear in our time that apparently are kosher to make those ashes from. But cutting to the chase here, and I'd encourage you to go back and read that in Numbers chapter 19. It's really interesting because they take this, normally sacrifices are made within the area of the holy place, but the red heifer was taken outside the camp, outside of the camp of Israel, which is normally thought of as being unclean. That's where, like, lepers and people, they were sent outside of the camp, outside of the gates. And so they took this heifer out there and killed it. Somebody killed it in front of the high priest, and then they burned it, the whole thing, its hide, its dung, everything. And then somebody gathered up the ashes. Everyone involved in this process became contaminated. And I didn't explain the purpose of the red heifer ceremony. The whole point of it is to get these ashes that are going to be mixed with holy water, essentially, that to purify the clean from the unclean. Yeah, you know how to make holy water in case you ever need to make some at home.
Oh, no!
It's pretty easy. All you got to do is boil the hell out of it, and you'll have holy water. All right. But no, the red heifer, the whole purpose of getting these ashes was to purify from contamination from death.
So they boiled or they boiled everything down. They burned everything down, even its hide and dung. So when they gather the ashes, it could be dung ashes. They don't know the difference.
Yeah. I mean, it's all
Like
it's all ash.
ashes.
It's all ash at
Okay.
this
So
point.
it's all this good stuff, all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
That's just what they gather.
And then they would mix it with living water, and then it would be sprinkled upon the person to be purified.
That's interesting.
But the people, every person involved in creating this substance that's going to be used to purify, was made unclean. The whole thing, the whole process, we have a paradox, because the whole process creates contamination to produce the thing that's going to purify.
Yeshua on the cross.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's also part of my notes here. But yeah, this is one of the things that I don't think that many people have thought about. What we're talking about here is paradox with all of this, and that I think that on some level, I think that the carnal mind, the materialistic mind, can't really embrace or go there with paradox.
Well, it's hard.
Yeah, but in order to really to find the truth, you're going to have to stand in that place of paradox between two poles, between things that are going to seemingly contradict.
If you want to find truth, if you consider yourself a true truth seeker, you can't get around that.
Yeah.
You got to deal with the hard stuff too.
That's right. Well, some examples from the natural that I want to mention. I mentioned the carcass of the lion and the honey being brought forth from him, but we have a number of examples in the natural. Mushrooms, if they're not poison, and then they'll kill you, so I wouldn't recommend eating those. But a lot of them are not harmful at all, and taste quite good in a lot of things. But they form normally, if not in all cases, from dying, decaying, kind of unclean junk that you really wouldn't. But a clean thing can be brought forth from that is kosher and clean. Likewise, oysters are not clean, but they produce something. They produce pearls that are clean and good and precious. So this precious thing can be brought forth, a clean thing from the unclean. What else? Volcanic soil. Some of the most fertile and good soil comes from the death of mountains.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And silkworms. They live in the dirt and darkness and die to produce silk, a fabric associated with royalty and beauty. So from the decay of the worm, something clean and radiant emerges. Even nature whispers the same truth as what we're seeing echoed throughout the scripture.
Well, and I mean, you put fertilizer and stuff on flowers. I mean, there's different kinds of fertilizer,
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I mean, you do that for gardens and different things. I mean, you put manure and stuff on that to fertilize the soil.
Well, I mean, it's nutrient rich.
Yeah.
As decayed dead bodies, whether it's animal, people, it breaks down, and all of that biomaterial goes back into the earth and gets used through the water and just through the process of the ground and soil and all of that. Food for worms. I mean, and it's one of those things that just freaks some people out. Like, I don't want to think about that. But that's the way that God works. He's very efficient with this realm, and this is not us.
Yeah,
this is a body,
right?
And we're living in a realm that is physical right now. But He gives us power to become the sons of God,
right?
And we don't want to be unclothed. We groan to be clothed upon with a heavenly body, and so yes, you'll be changed. But I mean, the idea for me of my body going back to the earth to be utilized is actually kind of comforting, because that tells me God is efficient. He's efficient with everything. Yeah,
well, and what you were quoting there, we could go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and it talks about how that this mortal shall put on immortality. This corruption shall inherit incorruptibility. And so again, the clean is brought forth from an unclean situation. And you brought up earlier birth. And
That's very unclean.
yeah, well, I
process.
mean, it literally is in the book of Leviticus, chapter 12. We have some of the laws of childbirth discussed there. And so when a woman gives birth to a man child, for example, she's unclean 7 days, and then she continues in that process of becoming purified for 33 days, for a total of 40 days. And there are offerings involved in that. Or with a female child, it's double that. It's 14 days of uncleanness, followed by 66 days of continuing in that process until she's completely clean. But the baby is clean. A clean thing is brought forth from an unclean.
Well, and how else is she supposed to bring forth all of the processes that it takes in her body, the blood and just all of the stuff, and then the pressure of childbirth? All kinds of fluids and stuff are going to come out of her body while she's pushing this new
Right.
life out. It's not a clean process.
Well,
but-
it's paradoxical, and this is something people have to break out of the idea that this or that
Right.
in a lot of cases. And so, like, because King David, he was somewhat. Why couldn't King David build the temple?
He was a person of blood. He had blood on his hands.
Yeah, he had too much blood on his hand, and blood contaminates. Blood contaminates the ground or areas, and so it ends up bringing uncleanness and contamination. On the other hand,
Through the shedding of blood, there's remission of sins.
there is no the thing that redeems this whole thing is blood. The thing that corrupts the whole thing is blood. Which kind of brings us back to the idea of the baby and the mother, the womb. The womb many times is symbolic or synonymous in some ways, or connected with the grave.
That's interesting.
In fact, like in the book of Job, in maybe a couple places, it refers to the womb and the grave, like right at, sort of simultaneously, drawing a comparison. Both of those things coming forth from either of those, going into one or coming out of one, creates uncleanness and contamination. On the other hand, and tying it up with what you were talking about, Yeshua, he who knew no sin, was made to be sin. And so
To
all
clean
of
everybody.
all of the contamination of the whole world, all of the sin was put upon him, and he died, and then he went down to Sheol, Hades, hell, the very epitome of death and uncleanness.
On a whole new level.
Yeah, I mean, as much as you
Spiritual.
can get. But from that, God pulled him out. He pulled forth a clean thing. Who can bring forth a clean thing from an unclean thing? That's just about as unclean as you can get. And he brings him forth now, clean, pure, glorious.
And able to do that for others.
Yes.
Make them the same way.
Yes.
Well, and that's his superpower.
An
He's totally does that.
amazing paradox with all of this. And this is something that I've been thinking about lately. We're kind of having to rush through this today. One thing I want to mention real quickly on that, in regards to that, a similar thing in the book of Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, it talks about the laws of leprosy, or tzara'at. And so, there's a lot to it to explain, but essentially, one little speck of leprosy the size of a bean or something on your skin renders you tamei, unclean, and you are put outside of the camp, and you become the Walking Dead, and you have to rend your garments, and you put your hand over your mouth anytime anyone draws near, and you say tamei, tamei, unclean, unclean. you're part of the Walking Dead.
It's almost like it's contagious. It's weird.
On some level, I think it is, but this is usually people think physical, but this is a spiritual affliction. I mean, that manifests itself physically. But part of the paradox with all of this is the text tells us that if the tzara'at, the leprosy, not a great translation, but something we can identify with, if it spreads and it continues to spread and continues to spread so that it covers the entire body of the person, so that when the priest that investigates this looks upon the person and now they're completely covered white with this tzara'at leprosy, now the priest says, he doesn't say you're unclean, now he says
Clean.
tahor, you're clean. When the person is completely covered, an amazing paradox, just like when Yeshua was completely covered
Right.
with the sin, the leprosy, the decay of the world, he becomes clean.
Well-
Why is that? We talked about it a little bit last night.
Well, and in, is it Revelation? Because you're not hot or cold, I'll spew you out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And a double-minded man won't get anything from me. And so, David said, unite my heart within me. And so work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So all of these things indicate we are in a duplicitous state. We are half and half. Part of us, Paul even said, wretched man that I am, I want to do certain things, but I do what I don't want to, talking about the struggle of trying to live for God. And so I think that kind of points to this of working out your own salvation in a sense of getting yourself to a place with God, of course, where something shifts and you go over that little mark, whatever that demarcation mark is of 50%, 55, 60, whatever, starts to aim more toward God than toward the other way. And something begins to happen where you become more fully, you're not halting between two opinions, and
Well-
you go one way, you go in all in, and at that point, even though there's still sin in you, it's not necessarily the presence of sin that's a problem. Like the carcass, the beehive and the carcass, the presence of the carcass being there and decaying. It wasn't really a problem if it wasn't affecting the part that had the honey.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Well, I guess we're going to have to go ahead and close this down for today. We got some things we got to get to,
People are coming over.
we weren't able to spend as much time on this as what I would like to. Please go ahead and click that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure and share this with other people. If you have any questions or comments, be sure and post them down below. You probably can think of some examples maybe that we didn't mention.
Lazarus.
Yeah, Lazarus.
He was decaying
Yeah, absolutely.
and was suddenly pulled back out of that and was clean enough to be walking around among his family and friends, and he has already
Absolutely.
been decaying. So
Right. Well, I hope it gives you some different things to think about and hope. I do. Last night I had a prison service. I do prison ministry, and I wouldn't go into those are pretty unclean places if I didn't believe that something
Absolutely.
clean could be
Right.
brought forth
Yep.
from the unclean.
Right.
And so Job was right within a limited framework. As a general rule, that usually is an impossible thing, but with God all things are possible, and he certainly has. The scripture is a complete mosaic
It is.
of God bringing forth a clean thing from an unclean.
Well, you're just talking about the process of transformation. If you're just going to go live like the pigs and think you're going to have a lot of good things come out of your life, you need to work on your concept of what things take. If you want a certain kind of life, you're going to have to become the kind of person that has those things. That there's just some practical wisdom there. But if we're talking about transformation of you interacting with God and engaging with the divine to make something that is of enduring value in a spiritual sense, then of course you're going to have to work these elements of transformation out, because God's taking us in a fallen state and he's getting us ready, without spot or wrinkle. So, I mean, absolutely, that is,
And
it's a transformation process.
Well, it begins to make sense
Yeah.
once you begin to see this pattern and
Right.
mosaic through the scripture
Take
of
hope.
why Yeshua came from Nazareth.
Yeah.
Because that's the way God does
it
things.
is.
He takes an unclean, chaotic, negative situation, and from that he does his magic and brings forth something pure and beautiful.
It does.
Thank you all very much. God bless you. Hope to see you real soon.
See ya. Hello.
Okay. Huh?
Apropos.
Seems fairly clear, doesn't it?
Didn't we just go through this? Who's on first? All right. So I can't turn it off without sitting up.
And we can just start right there, I guess. You don't have to
Well,
do
are
anything.
you blurry enough
Well, if
or
it's,
clear enough?
looks blurry, don't it?
Yes.
Okay, I guess start her over. Try something different. I mean,
I'm trying not to sit up so that it won't focus on me. Okay. What was your slogan you wanted to use? Huh?
Which one?
Apropos of nothing? Isn't that what you were hollering
That'll
from the
work.
bathroom a while ago? We ought to have t-shirts made, apropos of nothing.
We should do that.
Okay, goodbye.
Very thought-provoking.
Yes, it is.
Apropos.
Of nothing.
Yeah.
Hey, if you like this video, please click like and subscribe to be notified whenever we release new content, and to help other people find us out there on the vast plains of YouTube land. If you have a question or a topic you'd like for us to do a video about, just leave it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Later, y'all.